and combine the raw materials that I said are everywhere and certainly were on the earth, and spark them with lightning and things like that, and turn them into something. There has been not a lot of progress in that regard. You make lots of the organic molecules of which we're made, but you don't make something like life. Coming from the other direction, geneticists have reached a conclusion, having discovered more and more primitive organisms, way below bacteria on the evolutionary scale, called archaea, that possibly life began as an RNA molecule, not as a DNA molecule, which can be a much smaller molecule and much easier to produce. And so there are discussions in the literature of RNA life and the origin of RNA life, but no one's actually done it yet. No. There's one over there. Can you really throw it that far? I'll be impressed. Look at it.
Bueno, una pregunta. ¿Cuál es la definición aceptada generalmente de vida inteligente?
So I gave a definition of life which would apply to bacteria. The definition of intelligent life has been called into question by recent world events. But what I really mean is life that has developed technologically to the point where they could, in principle, or even in practice, communicate over interstellar distances. Not travel over interstellar distances, just send radio waves over interstellar distances. Now, we've had that capability since we built the telescope in Puerto Rico, Arecibo, which can send out signals, has sent out signals that are now coursing through space for thousands of light years and could be detected by an equally sophisticated or unsophisticated telescope. Okay. So when I say intelligence, I'm not talking about it in the usual sense, I'm talking about it in the technological sense that they have the ability to communicate across interstellar space and therefore give some signal that they exist.
Okay, we have another question.
Hola, buenos días. Mi pregunta es, ¿qué papel juega la paradoja de Fermi en explicarnos por qué todavía no hemos podido contactar con otras formas de vida inteligentes? No sé si me puede explicar un poquito de eso.
Right, so Fermi was not a fan of my argument. Fermi felt that if there were intelligent life distributed throughout the galaxy, then they would most likely have visited us, conquered us, colonized us, or whatever, and that we should see lots of signals from them and spaceships whizzing around and things like that. This was on the verge of World War II that he felt this, and of course there was a very strong notion that this is something innate in intelligence, that you want to conquer everything you can see. My argument is that a civilization that lives long enough to communicate over thousands of light years of space will have gotten over that impulse. So I prefer what I call the zoo hypothesis to the Fermi hypothesis. That is, we're in the zoo, and the intelligent civilizations are out there just watching to see if we're going to screw ourselves up or go forward. I think my time is almost up. I'm happy to keep answering questions.
Okay. Hi. So this equation, what you said, assumes that life has the same elements and I guess the same DNA structure that we have. Is there any adaptation of a formula that takes into account maybe living beings with 6 nucleotides instead of 4, or maybe based on different elements, extremophile living organisms that maybe takes it higher or down?
Right, this does not assume that DNA has 4 nucleotides or anything like that. It doesn't assume DNA even exists. It just assumes that chemistry is the same everywhere in the universe, and for that we have solid empirical evidence. The chemistry is the same. Now, what is life based on? Our life, of course, is all based on carbon. And that's because carbon is a unique of the 92 elements in being able to form bonds in the most number of ways. But for the universe, it's very important because carbon is the 4th most abundant element in the universe. It's hydrogen first, helium second, oxygen third, and oxygen, of course, is critical for life, and carbon. Now, you could use silicon or gallium or germanium or something like that, which also forms lots of bonds, although not as many as carbon. But they are 1/1,000,000th as common in the universe. So if we go with the simplest hypothesis, and that is we're going to use the most abundant building blocks, carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and calcium and things like that, then that's all the equation assumes. It doesn't assume anything about the exact structure of the hereditary nature of heredity. Last question. Yes.
Can we theoretically travel to communicate faster than the speed of light? That's it. That's
The speed of light. You're going to listen to a talk coming up on Einstein, or invite me back, because I have a whole talk on that. Einstein's theory of relativity does not actually say that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But what it does say is what the implications of that are. And the implications are, for example, that the window in the front of this building would break before the kid that threw the rock through it was born. That is, it completely abolishes the notion of cause and effect. So physicists are comfortable saying that we don't believe anything travels faster than the speed of light because we sort of like cause and effect. And people have spent time looking for things. A colleague of mine, late colleague Gary Feinberg at Columbia, made up tachyons, which travel faster than light. They go backwards in time, they have negative energy, they really mess up the world. People have looked for tachyons, we haven't found any tachyons. So all scientific knowledge is contingent. But the current best estimate we have is that no, nothing goes faster than the speed of light. Which doesn't mean you can't go anywhere, because if you go very close to the speed of light, time slows down for you to such an extent that you could live for thousands of years. There is now a project called Project Starshot, which is funded by one of these Russian billionaires, who's a little bit nuts, and what they want to do is send thousands of cell phone camera chips to Alpha Centauri, our nearest star, to get there in 20 years, which means they have to go about 20 or 30% the speed of light. And they have a plan for this. It's not going to work, but they have a plan for this. But it's an important moment in human intellectual history because it means people are actually thinking outside of our solar system. And it's not crazy to think in 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years that we could do that with technology and then ultimately do it for ourselves if we don't mess it up. Thank you very much.